Welcome, everyone. I'm Dana Peaver, decision expert, author, speaker, and podcast host. You're listening to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. More women than ever are faced with challenging decisions on a regular basis. I am so privileged to sit down with them to discuss exactly what they've gone through and how they've come out the other side, realizing their wildest dreams. I'm sure you'll be able to relate. And don't forget to stay to the end to take advantage of my latest free gift. Let's get started. Hello, you wildly courageous women. Welcome to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. I'm Dana Peaver, decision expert. And as always, we're here talking about decisions that have been made in our lives that were courageous or impactful or changed the course of our life, or even ones that we wish we could go back on. Each week, I join you twice, once with a guest and once solo. Today, I'll be sharing an impactful decision that I've made in my life. Since I've been studying the science of decision-making for over 30 years, the majority of my life's decisions have been made very intentionally using my 5-step Decision Smith system and app. I'll walk you through all my thoughts behind the scenes. But before we get started, I want to remind listeners to stay to the end to get access to my latest freebie. So we're going to take this step by step. I want to set the stage for you as it relates to the decision I can't wait to share with you today. I'm going to talk about the background, circumstances, what my mindset was, all of those key factors that I was taking into consideration as I was making this decision. So let's set the stage. If we go back in my life, after I finished high school, I attended university and I graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce degree in human resources. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work in the field that I had chosen to study in my life. I know that a lot of people go to school and wind up in the workforce on completely different paths than they had intended when they first started out. And that's okay. I actually attended, well, if we go back right to high school, finished high school. I was back when there was grade 13 in Canada. Took a year off, went to university for 2 years and studied psychology. And then decided that that wasn't the right career path for me. I knew I wanted to work with people, but not in that sense. Really, if I had to look at that decision, I felt like the person that I wanted to be in terms of what I offered was not necessarily looking at the past, but more so being able to change people's future. So I felt like psychology at that point in my life wasn't going to be a career that would afford me what I was looking for. So I finished 2 years of that, took another year off to really decide what it was that I wanted to be when I grew up. And that's when I landed on going back to school and I received my Bachelor of Commerce in Human Resources with a minor in Business Communications. So finished school. And again, was really fortunate to be able to work in my field. I worked in HR until I had my first child. At that point in time in Ontario, we were allowed to take a year off for maternity leave. So I made the most of that, went back to work. Then when I had my second child, did not go back to work after that. At that point in time, I had decided that I was going to consider working as a consultant in the HR field. I also had a few other projects on the go, but let's just leave it at that for now. So I wound up working in HR consulting. I did a little bit of event planning. And that's really when my decision coaching took off. I was able to get certified as a life coach. And I, at that point in time, honed my 5-step decision Smith system and had the Excel version of my app at that point in time. So I actually worked for 12 years on my own as a consultant with my own company, doing a variety of things, but mostly focused in the HR and decision-making realms. And I loved it. It afforded me the opportunity to be at home with my kids, uh, spend a lot of time with them once they started school. I was there when they got home from school. I had the opportunity to, take them to their sports or go to their sports. I made my own schedule. And it was really beneficial, I felt, for me as a mom. Now, I know not everyone has those same opportunities. I was just fortunate that, the work that I had done and the studying that I had done, and the network that I had built, because that was really key, um, were available for me to tap into as I grew my own business. So again, like I said, I worked uh, at that company on my own consulting for a dozen years. But it was at the end of the year the skeletons fell out of the closet. So I've told all of you that I'm an author, and the first book I published, I actually have a copy here. It's called The Decision to Purge: The Year the Skeletons Fell Out of the Closet. Um, the year the skeletons fell out of the closet was a very tumultuous and taxing year for me. And by the end of that year, I was a shell of myself. I lacked confidence. I had no energy. I couldn't get up and go. It was a really rough time for me. I made the decision to seek therapy at that point in time, which changed my life. Gosh, in the span of one visit, I felt better walking out of there after the first hour. So things were already starting to turn around by the end of the year, beginning of the following year. But I knew that my energy levels were so depleted that attempting to continue working on my own could be detrimental. Now, I know I work with a lot of women entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who are still working their day job, who are considering leaving their day job and moving into entrepreneurship. And that's a huge decision and a huge leap of faith. And I know so many women who do that with great success and great satisfaction. I was one of those people. I did that after I had my second child. I didn't go back to work, and I was very successful. But I had to really take a look at what I was feeling and what the thought of continuing to work on my own was doing to me. So if I put myself back at that time frame, like I say, I was exhausted. I had no energy to do anything. I was lucky, my kids were getting out the door to get to school on time. The house was getting clean and I was doing grocery shopping. I was really, really despondent and in a bad place. As that started to pick back up, I was attempting to continue to build and grow my business. But as you know, as an entrepreneur, it's not easy, because not only are you providing the services that you've sold, you're also doing all the marketing for those services. You're doing all the sales calls. You're upkeeping your website or whatever, social media platforms you have going on. You're bill collecting, which turned out to be much more onerous of a task than I ever anticipated. Goodness gracious. There's just so much involved with being a solopreneur, which I was at the time, that it really weighed on me. And I didn't think I had it left in me to continue down that path. So I thought about it long and hard. I really did. I, considered, what my options were, what would have to change from a family perspective in terms of our schedules and what we were used to. But at the end of the day, uh, I knew that if I didn't make a change, if I didn't do something different as it related to work, I wouldn't, I would be in a find myself in a worse spot than getting better. And I was really hoping that I was on the path to recovery at that point in time. And I was trying to remove all the roadblocks to get me back to my best self. So that's when I made the decision to start looking for work, for a job. And again, I was fortunate enough to be able to rely on my HR skill set as I was getting back in the workforce. So I started applying for jobs, and I was, very, very intentional. I was online every single morning, looking at all the new jobs that had come about, networking, reaching out to people, looking on LinkedIn to see who was connected to people at different companies that I was considering. I was researching company cultures and locations and their successes, and if they were publicly traded, what their stocks look like. So many things I was taking into consideration. I was also, talking to people who either worked for companies I was interested in or had worked there to see what it was like to actually work at those companies. So lots of legwork to consider, what my best option might be ultimately once I was offered an opportunity. So that took quite a few months. I think I started my job search probably wholeheartedly January, maybe February. And it was in April that everything just kind of landed in my lap all at once. I had been interviewing at 7 different companies. That's how prolific my job search was. I knew that I needed to do something for me to alleviate the stress. I wanted to be able to go to work, work my 9 to 5, come home at the end of the day, and turn things off as much as I could. I wanted somebody else to tell me what I needed to do every day. And I wanted somebody else to pay me every 2 weeks, because we all know as consultants or entrepreneurs, our paychecks are sporadic. Sometimes we can have incredibly good months, $15,000, $20,000 a month, and another month can be $3,000 or $4,000. There was not a lot that you could count on. Certainly, when I worked in that industry, I worked a lot on retainer. So I had regular clients on monthly billing schedules. But at the same time, the extra work I did or the one-offs that I did, were really situations that, you didn't know what would necessarily be coming in or when you might get paid. So I just wanted somebody to take all of that away. I needed a Calgon bath, take me away. I just wanted a job. Certainly, I wanted a job that was fulfilling and successful and, where I could really have an impact. But I wanted a job. I wanted that job. I didn't want the responsibility. I couldn't hack it at that point in my life. And that was a tough pill to swallow, because I've been an entrepreneur since, gosh, I had my first business license when I was 14 years old, back in my first year of high school. I don't know how old many of you are, but back then friendship pins were in style. And those were big safety pins that you would put different colored beads on and put them on your shoelace, on your shoe. So every day I went to school with a tackle box that had all my beads in them, all different kinds, different pins, different pom-pommy types. Oh my goodness. I had just this tackle box full of different beads that you could buy to make those friendship pins that you shared with your friends. So it's been in my blood since as long as I can remember. So going back to work for someone was not an easy decision. But at that point in time, it was a sobering one that I needed to make to be able to get back on my feet and get me back to get my sparkle back. I really lost it the year the skeletons fell out of the closet. So as I mentioned, it was about April, and I had 7 different opportunities in front of me. And that might seem like a great problem to have, and it was. But gosh, when you're faced with so many good opportunities, how do you go about making that kind of decision? So you've heard me talk about my 5-step decision Smith system in my app. And that's exactly what I turned to. I have been using a form of this process for over 30 years. But when it comes to tough decisions, I still go back to my own system and my own app to ensure that I am taking everything into consideration to be able to move forward in the best possible way for me. So if you're not familiar with the Decision Smith system or my app, I'll give you a quick rundown. There's 5 steps, like I mentioned. And the first one really is to identify the decision that you have in front of you. So, I'd already been through a few stages of this, where one of the first decisions I had made was whether or not to go back to work at a job, a job. So I'd used my app to ensure that this was the exact right decision for me. And, as I looked at making that decision, a lot of the factors that I took into consideration were ones that I've already mentioned. How tired I was, how I wanted somebody else to tell me what to do. I wanted a regular paycheck. I wanted to be engaged again with a team of people. I don't mind working alone, but I love brainstorming and, working on team projects and getting things done as a team. And I also love being a leader. So the opportunity for me to actually lead people and manage people again and watch them grow and flourish in their careers was definitely something that I was looking forward to. So all those factors were taken into consideration as I made the decision whether or not to go back to work. So then the next decision for me was, which job would I take? So that's step 1 of the system. Step 2 is, what are my options? Well, as I mentioned, I had 7 options in front of me. And typically when we look at the process at that stage, a lot of times we make sure that we consider status quo as one of our options, because a lot of times you have the opportunity to just stay as you are, which sometimes turns out to be a better option than some of the options that you are considering. I know it's not always the case, and we don't always have that opportunity to stay where we are, but I want to make sure if you're making a decision that you think about that, each and every time. So as I mentioned, that in this case, I had 7 options. Now that's a really high number. Typically, when we're working through decisions, we're looking at potentially 2 or 3 options. Typically, so 7 was pretty high. But this system can work for any number of options. So I went ahead and I, put all of those options into my app. The third step of the process is to define my factors and what I was taking into consideration. So while the factors I looked at when I was deciding whether or not I would go back to work, included all the things I've already talked about. a lot of the factors that I was taking into consideration for, taking on a new job included obviously things like salary and location, but also the company and the opportunity for growth and what I'd be doing, the opportunity to lead people and those types of things. And typically when I'm looking at a list of factors, they're 15, 20, 25 items long. If you're, making a really tough decision. And I know my list was rather long because looking at a job, a job, was going to take up a lot of my working hour or a lot of my waking hours. So I wanted to make sure that whatever I chose would serve me. And it's okay to be selfish in situations like this where you're looking at doing something that's going to change your life. One of the things that I love to call out here, and is a factor that often gets included regardless of the decision, is being able to take into account what other people around you feel about the decision. So, a factor can be what your spouse thinks or how it will affect your children or your family life. Those are things that you can take into consideration as part of your factor list. So I certainly had all of those listed. Now, the fourth step of the system is to rate your factors. And that's, helping you determine how important each of those things are for you right now. So, I'm trying to think what factors on that list might not have played as big a role. I was looking for a benefits package, but it didn't have to be, an extremely good one, because that would be a second benefit package, because my husband also had a benefit package with his work. So, if I was rating how important those factors were, the type of work I had to do was rated a 9 or a 10. The benefits offered was probably a 3 or a 4. It wasn't as big of a factor in terms of consideration. So a lot of the factors I was taking into consideration that scored high were things like the type of company, the type of work that I would be doing, the hours. I was certainly looking for 9 to 5 type of job. I didn't want to be working evenings or weekends because that would impact my family life. But again, some of the things that didn't pertain as much or weren't rated as highly, as an example, were what the benefit package entailed. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what else wasn't high. But you get the picture. You can look at, say you're looking at buying a house, and the factors that you're taking into consideration might be, number of bedrooms or size of the backyard or, proximity to school. Those were probably all high, but maybe a low factor might be the closest, fire hydrant for, insurance purposes and that kind of thing. So again, just rating those factors. And the final step of the 5-step system is to score your options against the factors. Now that's where it gets a little convoluted and confusing. And that's why the app is such an easy tool to utilize when you're making these tough decisions. So if I haven't mentioned already, it's called the Decision Smith app. And you can find it on iTunes and Google Play, and it's free to download. And you put all that information in, just follow the steps. And what it gives you a mathematical score and a percentage that points you in the right direction. And some people say, well, how can it know? Well, if you've been honest in putting in all of your information and you've taken the time, sometimes those list of factors take a week to ensure that we've covered everything. If you've been honest and dug really deep in making this decision, and you've input all that information, and you've been truthful in your rating and your scoring, then that answer that it gives you is not a lie. It's telling you, based on what you've said, what you've identified as your important areas to consider, it's telling you what your best option is. So I put all of the scores in for those 7 job opportunities I had in front of me. And it came out, the highest score came out for this one company that I had never even really heard of. And the job wasn't something that I really, really was like excited about. But overall, it had the highest score, and it told me that was my best decision. And it was a high score in itself. And I remember being close to my bed, and I took my phone and I threw my phone on my bed and I said, "Stupid app." And this is my own app, something I've created and something that I've used and honed over, 30 years of experimentation. But I trusted my app because I've trusted it and this system for so long, and for every tough decision that I've made in my life. And I've watched people use it and be successful and make decisions that completely have surprised them in terms of what they thought initially would be the outcome, and something surprisingly come to the surface. So I actually accepted that job, that job, and it afforded me 7 great years of work with 7 promotions during that time frame, and a salary increase that came along with each of those promotions. I sometimes wonder why I wound up staying for 7 years, but in all fairness, the work was fulfilling, and I was able to continue to help people make tough decisions in my spare time. So it was an opportunity that, my app shared with me would be the best decision for me at that point in time. And it turned out, surprisingly and ultimately, that it was the absolute very best decision I could have made. So that is a story about a huge decision that I made as it relates to career. So I want to thank you for sharing your time with me today. To all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And if you're ready to realize your wildest dreams and join us in the Wildly Courageous Women Facebook group, your life will be changed, one brave decision at a time. I'm Dana Peever. Until next time, make great decisions and do life fun. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wildly Courageous Women. Keep listening to hear more stories of these incredible women realizing their wildest dreams. If you have a story to tell about a decision that you've made that has impacted your life, I'd love to feature you as a guest. Please get in touch, and don't forget to grab my latest gift by clicking below. I'm Dana Peever. As always, make great decisions and do life fun.